speaking to us. Brian, over to you.
Thank you. And I'm just looking for, I know who it is, but if you can pop up, turn off your, put yourselves on mute, if you would, please. That'd be absolutely fantastic, and thank you for doing that. I think it's gone quiet again, which is great. So thank you all for coming. It's fantastic to see you all. It looks like we have company because it sounds like somebody's having dinner. But thank you all for being here. And this session is going to cover a bunch of things. It'll cover it's going to cover the power of story. It'll talk about just one or two technical things about pitch, pace, pause, and also the important things of being able to. Yes, I'm just seeing if I can. I think just going back to this while we're getting this thing settled. Justine, you should be able to mute all. I thought, Can I mute all? No, I can't. I don't see where I can mute all at the moment. And I don't want to end the muting, but hopefully that should settle down if anyone is on. So what I'm going to do is just show you a video. Adrian, I think possibly it's yours that's on, that needs to be muted. I may be wrong, apologies if I am, but you're popping up in my profile. That's it. Thank you. Probably some work stuff behind you, so thanks for doing that. And then if it gets very noisy, we'll know it wasn't you. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you a video of the first pets. And full declaration, my son Will is a filmmaker and videographer, Firewood Pictures, and he does some lovely stuff. And we commissioned this piece about the impact that people of work on people. But I'd really like you to focus on, if you would, is watch the body language of the folk involved. Let's have a watch, if you will, of this.
It's going to be a late one, I'm sorry, Dom. Yeah, it's just a lot going on today.
Hey.
Hello, Chris. Yeah, I'm Chris.
Right, everything okay? Oh, you look fresh, right? Rough night, Chris.
Right, well, if any of you need anything today, you know where
I'm not
okay?
sure if we've got capacity, but
No, that's fine. I'll be able to manage for this week.
Chris, you seem a bit off. What's going on, Dave?
Hey, what's that? There's just something else.
I'm finding really hard, mate.
Okay, what are you struggling with?
No, you get down. You sure you're okay? You think?
Just feels a little bit hidden down here. Okay, that's fine. I can sort it. Jack's off sick. Yeah, I know, it's just, well, really short staffed, isn't it?
Are you all right?
Yeah, I'm fine. No.
So if you watch that, what are your comments on that, what you've just seen in terms of the body language, how this person came over? Clearly he's a manager, it could be a manager of a physio department quite readily. What struck you about how he was communicating, how he was being seen, what was going on when he wasn't in the public gaze or in the staff gaze? Any observations on that? About his communication, and also did it resonate? Yep, absolutely, Christine. Sorry, did look stressed. So, what are your thoughts about how he looked, how he came over? Yeah, interesting, really interesting observation, Kate. Lots of, I think it's fantastic to see so many of you here as well. Some wonderful, really insightful comments, and thank you. You know, looking stressed, closed down when not with others, and also keeping a barrier between himself and the others. So really kind of trying to be the supportive manager. You know, it looks like he's always has an open door, which can be problematic. It's the old adage. You know, if you never say no, your yes isn't worth much. And also, you know, the thing is that givers have to stop giving because takers will never stop taking. And Helen, your point, it looked like he was putting on a show, clearly exasperated body language. You know, he's on the phone at some point, it's like, oh, really? We haven't got a staff? Sometimes giving out, other times not coping. Being more open on the phone, but at the end, he just didn't hide it. We'll circle back to that point, Banu, about not hiding in front. It seemed inside himself, miles away. Truly, you just look at this picture, disengaged, look disinterested, this spiral. People want to be helpful, but often they can't to balance their long term. You may have caught he's ringing his partner at home, saying, "Look, I'm really sorry, I'm going to be late." And interesting, Jane, you picked up that you felt he wasn't so professional the way he speaks to whoever he's talking to, and that he looks like burnout. And this, in a way, illustrates how we not only communicate, but how we perceive people are communicating, how we perceive ourselves and how we are communicating, and how our intent is not the same as our impact. So while many may have thought, well, actually, he was doing his best to help you, how can I help? What's on your mind? For you, Jen, you picked up, well, actually, I don't think he was particularly professional. And that's what's really critical in communication for impact, which is how we come over really matters. And perception often matters more than truth. But the other bit is this: when we're communicating, when we are stressed, when we are happy, our emotions leak. Our emotions leak all the time. We may think we've got a poker face. We may think that we are presenting this professional persona and we're trying to be helpful. But actually, one thing that pretty much all of you picked up in one form or another is this is not a happy man. He looks like he's stressed. He looks like he's engaged. He looks like he's distracted, and it looks like he's not coping. And yet, in front of his people, he was trying to do all of the good things that a good manager would try to be. But actually, it was good when somebody said to him, "Are you okay?" And the purpose of this video, if you will, the purpose of this talk is repurposing it, is to get people talking about what it's like being a leader and a manager in today's NHS, or indeed in any other kind of environment. But the way we communicate tells a story about us. And when it comes to change, you know, when it comes to culture change, it comes to communication, there's three bits, and it talks about the narrative really, and the stories of communication. How do we communicate and how we come over has three dimensions to it. And if we're trying to impact and trying to have communication for impact, it's not through our heads that make the biggest impact. What we do, it's heads, hearts, heads, and hands in that order. So, and I'll talk a lot more about the stories, but on the neuroscience of stories, but what we do is when we communicate most effectively, we are not communicating first to people's heads. We are communicating to their hearts because we connect with story. The why gives us connection and collaboration and engagement. Have any of you watched, I mean, James Bond is probably the best example. Or you know, these action films or many films. And if you read most autobiographies, they don't start out with, well, I was born when I was very young and I'm not dead yet. It doesn't start with that. It'll start with something like, you know, just think about, say, Harry, the death of Diana, for instance, or Winston Churchill facing down Hitler in the darkest hour. It won't start out with, well, you know, Winston Churchill was born in the 18th or the 19th century. He lived a very privileged life. He did all this, that, and the other, and finally gets to World War II. Because by that, you have switched off. Think about, I think pretty much most of us have seen a James Bond film. It starts with the action, and we're emotionally invested because it's connected to us emotionally, to our hearts, to our students. Like, oh my God, this story, what happens next? So when we're looking to create culture change, communicate with impact, we start with the heart. It's the stories that's how we connect most powerfully. That's why in Irish culture in ancient times, if you will, the chieftain war, or the Taoiseach, that's where the word Taoiseach, Irish Prime Minister, actually originates from chief. The chieftain wore 7 colours. There's a real hierarchy to this. The person who was allowed to wear 6 was the poet and the storyteller. That's how elevated story is in Irish culture. And that's why we got per head of population, great number of Nobel laureates in literature, you know, Heaney, James Shaw, George Bernard Shaw, William Butler Yeats, and so on. So it's the hearts, the stories. Then, in terms of communicating, then once we've engaged their hearts, then we can engage people's heads. And if you will, that's the what and the how. And then, if you really want to communicate for impact, say, here's some things that you could do. And if we can take the NPJ paralysis example, and thank you, Justin, for your kind introduction there. You know, deconditioning harms patients and steals their time. How are we going to do this? Well, if you think about the reconditioning campaign that's happening now, the NPJ paralysis campaign, some of you are involved now, Justine will have been in the east of England, the deconditioning campaigns, the get up, get dressed. This is what we're going to do. These are our goals. We're going to reduce length of, we're going to reduce harm. We're going to capture the data. We're going to engage people. And the hands bit is, right, so what does that mean? Well, putting, and please help if you can remember the name of it, if you will, please, those pedal, the little ones that patients who are sitting in their chair or sometimes even their beds can pedal on. Things like two physios, I think it was, in Luton, did the tour the east of England. And what they did is they did virtual cycling around the whole of the east of England. So those were things that they came up with, then other people picked it up. So when you're trying to communicate, hearts, heads, hands in that order. And a technical to just, and do please, as I say, please chip in, because this will be, I'd like it to be as chatty and interactive as possible. I'm not going to be talking for a whole hour for sure of it. And in the technical level, when it comes to communicating for impact, the higher the pitch, as in the higher the voice, the more it'll be confused with nervousness. And notoriously, Margaret Thatcher was trained to lower her voice, so she became much more authoritative. And there is a thing, there's a gender dimension to this. We know throughout history, from the time Mary Beard is the professor of classics at Cambridge. And I think her book, brilliant book, I think it was called Women and Power, where she's looked at the ancient texts and how women's voices are muted. But the other thing, there's a thing around communication is because from a gender point of view, women's voices, their vocal cords are higher up. They tend to have women tend to have a higher pitch as women born, but those born female. I'm not going to, if I may, get into the other dimensions of this, but it means that voices don't carry as far, and their pitch being higher tends not to be heard. And a book I can commend to all of you around some of this work will be the wonderful, I was going to say Gabriel Garcia Marquez. It's not her. He was the Argentinian playwright. It's Caroline Criado Perez, and her book was called Invisible Women. Outstandingly good book. You know, women are more likely to die in a car accident because the crash test dummies were based on men, and all the amazing stuff. Women's drugs tend to be based on male rather than female, and all sorts of stuff. But one of the things she talks about is pitch and the impact that can have. But the higher the pitch, the more that can be confused with nervousness, which then means people tend to be taken less seriously. So when you are speaking, when you are communicating, whether it's on a stage or with professionals, so with what's the phrase I'm looking for, with in front of colleagues, in front of patients, multiple individual relatives, large groups, be mindful of your pitch. That's, by the way, not to say to start pretending you're a bass when you're more of a soprano or an alto. It's being mindful of it. The other piece then is about the power of pace. And that, in short words, is the speed at which we speak. If you speak in a monotone at the same old, I had an English teacher at school. We used to call him the block. And the block only spoke at one pace. And honestly, we did 40-minute talks at school on a Wednesday. It was double English, and it was the longest 80 minutes of the whole week. And it was absolutely shocking. I mean, I'm boring myself talking to you at this point. so it's about creating a melody, you know, and if you think about a piano playing a single note, you know, it's actually really, really dull. Whereas if you see a piano where somebody's playing a melody, it moves us. So the speed at which we play, so that means be mindful of being variable in your speech. Some of this is apparently bleeding obvious, but we've all seen or been at meetings, and the word we use, the verb we use is droning. So that stuff matters. The last one I would say is about the power of pause. And I'm going to read a sentence twice, and you can decide which one has the biggest impact. Here's the first run of this one. Patient time is the most important currency in healthcare, and while our time is busy and important, our patient's time is sacred. Or, patient time is the most important currency in healthcare, and while our time is busy and important, our patient's time is sacred. Which one did you prefer? And that wasn't a particularly polished version of the latter, by the way. The one where pause at the key moments, or the one who is just read straight. It's yeah, exactly, that's it. And the reason you're right, absolutely. The latter is the power of that in the pausing is it does two things. First, it allows us to process the information we've heard so far. And the second, it adds ballast to what is coming next. And your point, Katie, is absolutely right. The pause and the tone are vital. And when I'm doing my thing, you know, the public speaking, I use a lot of pause in my presentations. Partly because sometimes the information provided can be complex, but more importantly, when I want to land a message, because the thing is you can overdo it and then people tune out. But if I want to really land a message, I will, with deliberateness, use pause. So, patience. Naomi, thank you for saying that. That's awesome to have your honesty in opening up to that. When I'm excited about what I'm talking about, I have a high voice and talk fast, hard to slow down. Well, I'll share with you work I've done in a lot of stuff with an organization called the Health Roundtable, brilliant organization. The guy who founded it, who's now retired, he's from Texas, and Dr. David Dean. And he would always say to me, Brian, remember, you're Irish, you need to slow down. that's the feature of it as well. And because I would have him in my ear, I would be very mindful. Because the other feature of the power of the pause is when we're with those who are very familiar with us, and that there's a cultural dimension to this as well. No surprise, no shock to most people understanding that Irish people will speak very, very quickly with each other. And I was having breakfast one day. I was meeting a colleague, for breakfast, a colleague of mine in Australia, and she was joining me. I was talking to my sister Denise, and I kind of finished the phone call up as quick as I could, which in an Irish thing it's about 5 minutes. And she said, when Beck said to me, Brian, the only thing I understood of that 4 or 5 minutes of you saying goodbye to your sister was, here's Beck. Because you just you speak really, really quick. So be mindful always of your audience. And here, actually, while it's in my head, I'll tell you this thing. For nervousness, if you get nervous about public speaking, what you can start to do is get constricted, but your voice gets kind of higher and you feel very much tense. Reframe it, because the reason that happens is you start thinking about you as a speaker and what you have to do. You become a more powerful speaker when you turn it on its head and think, I am here to serve other people. They are wanting to hear what I have to say because I am there for them. So if you make what you talk about them, not you, it relaxes you and you become more potent as a speaker, because you're seeking to engage, to serve, to connect. It's not about you, it becomes about them. And bullet points and paragraphs. Some people speak in bullets, some people speak in paragraphs. I'm going to give you an example from a lyric from Christy Moore, the great Irish troubadour, Christy Moore. And he's talking about politicians. And, you know, this is how a long paragraph might go of a politician explaining things. And the bullet point is what they're actually trying to say. So this is me reading the lyrics. And here it goes. We'll be looking at ways we can better facilitate the formulation of a coherent strategy designed to lead us into a future with confidence in our proven ability to communicate on a meaningful level in an open and fair and transparent society with frontline facilities, roads and utilities, open up new lines of inquiry about the possibility of phasing out the elderly. I couldn't even, as much as I couldn't even do that in one breath. But has any of you ever watched or listened to and then muttered more and more darkly at a radio interview or the telly with a politician, and they talk and they use words and they use cliches and good? It's like, what exactly are you trying to say? So as Christy Moore said, actually the song starts, I hate politicians. So does that kind of resonate? When you are trying to communicate, think as much as you can. And this is not the same as storytelling, by the way. You can tell a very succinct, powerful story in few words. The art of the short story is incredibly powerful, much more indeed. If a story writer has words that fought their way into it, it makes a much more powerful one. But when you're telling stuff, if you use language that obfuscates rather than clarifies, people tune out. Amy, your comment about recognizing my need to literally pause, even for 5 seconds outside a room, and take a moment to stop, especially during a busy day for a walk in a conversation, as usually I'm more articulate and speak with great clarity. That's a brilliant point. Amy, can you come off mute? Because I think that is such a great and important point that you're making. Would you be happy to talk to it a bit more?
Hello everyone. Yes, I can. You've put me on the spot, Brian. How could
my
you?
Apologies. You can pause, get your clarity while I'm explaining.
Yeah, literally. For me, it's so easy to get caught up in the treadmill of a busy day when you are looking after patients, communicating with relatives, communicating with other members of staff, other colleagues, and all of that together, particularly when then you need to go and have what you might consider a more challenging conversation, just means if you're able, and I really do mean the space of just pausing at the door and going, okay, just thinking that before you step into the room, you might find that you drop your shoulders, and it's, you know, sometimes people might consider it quite a subconscious action, but you just stop, your shoulders drop, and you almost walk in to that conversation, putting all the other conversations that you might have had that day behind you or to one side for a moment. Yeah. And it really helps me personally.
Yeah, it's fantastic, because what you're doing there, if I may suggest, is you're doing, it's called a state break. And what it is you're breaking out of the state of, oh my God, I've got to sort this out, I've got to sort a discharge, I've got to sort out all these things, into a moment of, right, pause, move forward in a different state. And I know you say you drop your shoulder, but actually what we tend to do is we take a breath, put our shoulders back, and walk in. And that, what that does, it does two things. It gives people a visual assumption about you. Okay, Amy's walked in, she's obviously, it's going to be a difficult conversation, but this is somebody who looks confident, and that gives people confidence. And you also, I'm sure, in what you do, Amy, and this will apply to all of us, is you will speak with greater confidence, more fluency, and more clarity. And you've got amazing diction, if I may say so. People will straight away, you will hold the room, you will hold that space, because you will come over as somebody with self-assurance. How you feel may not be like that, but actually how you present is what's important to people. Does that resonate, Amy?
Absolutely. No, I think, fundamentally it's a part of how you portray yourself, even if your stomach is doing flips on the inside. And the other thing, I would say as well is sometimes in conversations, people tend to talk, and there's a time to state something and almost just let that hover.
And let people take time to process. And sometimes you circle back to that point because you have to let it nest a while, and then people continue to, they will maintain their momentum. And then it's like, okay, I'm ready. I've kind of subconsciously processed. What was it you wanted to make the point about again? So yeah, absolutely. All of what you're describing is so right. And it is very, very important that we do take a pause at a patient's door, a patient's room, just before we go in, just a pause, because it gives us that break of things that we can communicate in a way that helps us. It's sometimes called the third space. And if you watch tennis players, they do this brilliantly, because in a sense, we're always communicating, always, all the time. So what you'll see, they've lost a point, they've double faulted. And then what you'll see them doing, watch this, because when you think about the top 20, 30 players, there's nothing in it. A lot of it's about mindset. So what they'll do, they'll bounce the ball, they'll bounce it a second time. Then they will pause. And what they've done is they've introduced that state break where they're saying, okay, I blew it with that one, I'm acknowledging it. Now the pause. Then they'll bounce the ball again, and they're into the state of, right, the next one is going to be an ace. So that's what you tend to find. It's that way of communicating as well. And when it comes to how we communicate, the fact you can't not communicate, if you will, in the chat box, what do you see? What do you see in this image, this here? Yeah, it's a good point, Naomi. So what do you see here? In the chat. So many different as well as awesome observations. I know when I did this with a group of mental health nurses, they said that looks like a person who is suffering. So projected onto hands covering the real face, the image others want to see. So we tend to, as I'll talk about in a little while, we tend to interpret and apply our own interpretation of the world, and we transpose it into another person. Some might say, well, split lips, split chin, so how we see this is interesting. And why this is relevant is we're communicating all the time. There's, some of you might, I can't remember what the percentages is that, 70% is visual, and you can work out what somebody's mood is in just by watching a blank screen. That was, I can't remember, and I should have looked up what the percentages were, but this mythical thing about most of it's all visual and stuff like that, we can see what. It's not quite true, because that particular study was done in vitro rather than vivo. If you watch a telly with the music, with the sound down, sure, you can see if they're angry on EastEnders, but then they're always angry on EastEnders. So that's not going to get you a Nobel Prize for communication. But at the same time, a lot of the time, you know, if you look at, I'm just thinking of the actors, for example, good actors. I went to see Banshees of Inisherin last night with my son, and wonderful film. But what great actors do is they don't overact. They give you the inference, the eyebrow, the fleeting looks. I mean, Hamdram, it's over accentuated, over egged, and the most powerful ones actually play it down. Meryl Streep, the goat. She, the greatest of all time, in case anyone's wondering, she thought that when she did that Looking Up, I think wasn't it, with Leo DiCaprio and Jennifer Lawrence, you know, both of them Oscar winners, and somebody else. And they were talking about, and they were doing a lineup at the red carpet. She said, "Oh, you know, let's go to go." She said, "Oh, that's fine. Just move the old woman, move the goat." And I said, "No, Meryl Streep, you are the greatest of all time. We are, you know, we may have Oscars, but you are the greatest." Why? Because she was such a powerful actor. She becomes her character and then communicates as her character would. And she played a film in which she was the first female editor of the Washington Post. And when they were doing a bit of analysis of her, how she came over, how she would just like pat her clothes down, close the door in a way that was very perceived as very feminine when she was trying to influence pale, stale, older males. So she played a role within a role to have the most powerful impact, because she was communicating in the way that they wanted her to, which meant that she got what she wanted. So you constantly are communicating. You're communicating when you're walking down the corridor and you might be thinking about seeing your next patient, and you walk past the cleaner and you may be distracted. You may not notice them, but they will notice you not noticing them, because you've communicated without saying a word. And what we are effectively, when you look at that last image, and yes, I must admit, Carol and I would have been confused as well, because I certainly was. First time I was looking, I was doing it at this angle and that angle. But we are all a mass of unspoken feelings. We might speak 100 to 120 words a minute, but in our heads, we might be going at 800 words a minute. There's a Polanyi, the philosopher, says, we know more than we can say. We are constantly we're having conversations with us more than we are having conversations with anyone. And I tell you, by the way, all for free, if you spoke to your friends the way you talk to yourself at times, you wouldn't have any. But how we communicate leaks in terms of how we talk to ourselves. If you're having a cross word with yourself, you will come over that way. You start a meeting with an angry tone, it'll be an angry meeting. Because the thing is this, we are fascinated. We're telling stories all the time. And I love this line from Jonathan Gottschall, where he says, as a species, we are addicted to story. Even when the body goes to sleep, the mind stays up all night telling itself stories. And in fact, for Hippocrates, Hippocrates, father of medicine, back in that time, they believed that the soul left the body each night to go off on fantastical journeys, and that's what dreams were. So we're always telling stories. It's how we make sense of the world. We connect through story. Muriel Rukeyser, the poet, says, the universe is not made of atoms, it's made of stories. And why that's relevant is the way we communicate our stories becomes, in many respects, the kind of person we are seen as. And we all love a good storyteller. So storytellers communicate effectively and have the greatest impact. That's why we love books as well. And what is the power of story? Well, the first one is about the power of connection. And that power of that connection is the stories we tell ourselves. And that stories we tell ourselves is the stories of gossip, the stories of who you are as a nation, whether you're from Scotland or England, Wales, Northern Ireland, the Republic, whether you're from the West Indies, those connections, those stories we tell of who are we as a people, but also who are we as a family, who are we as friends, who are we as professionals, as physios. And I love, it's such an honor being the president of AGILE. You know, what are the stories that connect you as a tribe of mainly physios on this thing? So the connection becomes important to us. When it comes to uncertainty, what happens is we fill in the gaps. When we're not sure, we just fill in the gaps because our brain doesn't like uncertainty. When it doesn't like uncertainty, when it has uncertainty, it'll just make stuff up. You know, 1 and 1 becomes 3. That person, that consultant who breezed past you maybe having something that they're dealing quite gnarly problem professionally or personally, but your uncertainty is, oh my God, they're ignoring me. Oh my goodness, they're communicating. They're very cross about me. The last time I spoke to someone, the last ward round, we disagreed about something which didn't seem important to me, but oh my goodness, now suddenly, can you see how it all just flies off? And it's often about the communication that led to that story that was created. The impact is about our perception of that reality, which ties into uncertainty, because perception matters more than truth. And the impact the impact of our perception becomes that truth. And then our expectations, that story is both colored by expectations and it even informs expectations. If as you know, largely physios, we'll just work on the basis of vast majority here are physios. If your expectations are that you can do a bunch of stuff, that is the story you tell yourselves as professionals. One of the things that was done by one of the participants in the NPJ Paralysis Summit, she did what's the word I'm looking for, a survey, and I think it was about 70, 80 people in the survey, and it's about the confidence and competence of physios getting patients out of bed versus nurses, and there was a very surprising gap. It was physios, it was 9 and 10 out of 10 for competence. For nurses, it was 7. Now, something I'll always say is, one of the stories I tell is, since when did it become the physio's job to get patients out of bed? But there's a story that's emerged, and how it gets communicated is, oh, we can't do this, we're going to have to get someone else in to help us. So the power of story, the power of narrative gets communicated, and it has a significant impact. So the questions to ask is, which isn't, you know, for this time, it was doing a workshop, or would be asking it, which is, what stories do you tell yourself? If you ever use the phrases just or only, then those stories will not always be the most positive of stories. So the stories we tell ourselves can make us bigger or smaller. If you think I'm only a band 5 physio, you will present to the world as a band 5 physio. It's not about your technique, your technicality skills, your capability, your competence. The story you tell yourself will shape how you present to the world and how you communicate who you are. And it's not just about band 5s. It can happen at any level. I was doing some work with 3 CEOs, one of whom in the northwest of England years ago, and one of them actually said, well, I'm only a CEO. So, you know, Henry Ford was right. Whether you believe you can or believe you can't, you're absolutely right. And Justine, you're not just a community physio, absolutely. So how do we deconstruct our stories and the consequences that has in terms of impact for communications? Well, the first question to ask is, what are the stories I regularly tell of me and to others about me and about my profession, my team, my organization? What are the stories I regularly tell? And then the question that really needs to be asked is the story I regularly tell about me true? Is it true? And often it isn't. And then the next question is, does it serve me? And Linda Holt and I, this partner and I, we're running a program for 100 band 6 and 7s in Oxford right now of nursing. I'm really pleased about the talking potentially. I'd help and love that comes off. But we were talking about deconstructing stories. And I gave the example of, I did a master's in nursing. So stories I regularly tell. Did a master's in nursing and I failed my statistics. The story I told is, I deserve to fail stats. I didn't work nearly hard enough. Yes, we had a terrible teacher and truly he was a shocker, but actually that was on me. So I needs to own it. Now, is it true? Yes, it was. Did it serve me? Well, the following year, I went to Oxford University, did a master's in educational research methodology at New College in Department of Education. So, stories that told, I failed maths. Was the story I'm bad at stats? No, it's I did not work enough at stats. Was that true? Yes. Did it serve me? Well, it meant I worked way harder the following year and ended up getting an A in statistics, having failed. I mean, I did pass when I repeated my exam, I passed it in King's from a nursing master's, but the next year I got an A. So when we deconstruct stories, and the purpose of telling this story is the stories we tell can change. The stories about us can change. How we then come over is I no longer see myself as somebody who failed in stats and perhaps derailed my research career. I saw myself as somebody who was successful enough to be able to change the story to get an A. In fact, got a distinction in my master's. So we can deconstruct, because the stories we need to tell, what are the stories we do tell, what are the stories we need to tell. Agile, an amazing, amazing network of physios working with older people. The story that needs to be told, to my mind, is that we are part, and we are part of something which is so important for the 21st century, because this is the century of the older person. And people who work with older people are like archaeologists. They look past the ruins to the beauty that lies within. And to my mind, that is a hell of a story to be able to tell. 30,000 days, what do you think that represents? What do you think 30,000 days represents? Do please put it in the chat. If you know and you've heard me, don't do a spoiler. But if you don't, what do you think 30,000 days represents? Working life. It's taking longer for the comments to come in. Perhaps you're thinking, I can smell the burning. 15 years. The amount of time talking. I love that one, Kate. Is that the story you're telling yourself, Kath? I'm not good at maths. Maths times, if done repeatedly, can make a change. Oh, look how long we spend in bed. I'm loving your answers. Brilliant, Carolyn. And I'm stumped. Thank you for acknowledging that one, Helen. I promise I will tell you. A frail patient's life expectancy once they've been admitted to hospital. Actually, the answer is this, if only it were. The answer is, that's life. Literally, this is what we get. This is our lives. About, if I did the maths again, it's something like 80 years. We get about 80 years. And I do hope, it's not a lot. No, you're absolutely right. I hope you enjoyed your weekends, because you only get 4,000 of them. And the reason that I use this slide is to bring home the fact that our days are precious and we waste them like spendthrifts. And we treat old people as if they have all the time in the world. But to my mind, they're the ones who are in a real hurry. And the 30,000 days, you can tell with 5 numbers, a whole story. You can communicate a life. So you can. And you can evoke emotion through number as well as words. Through images, they evoke the most powerful communication medium, as we know. But 30,000 days is it. So what are you going to do with that one wild life you have been gifted? Because we may not be here for a long time, but let's be sure we can make it as good a time as possible by connecting to our purpose, remembering what matters and what matters to us, and realizing that our time is precious. We don't have an awful lot of it. So an extra chocolate fish to Isabel and Anya for picking that one up, that it is about lifespan. And the language, when it talks about the power of language, I promise I'll talk about that. I really dislike the term front line, because it infers as a back line that doesn't matter. But you try and do your jobs without the clinical coders, whose part of their role is to be able to determine what it is your contribution was, so we can get the funding in to reflect the actual clinical needs of the populations and communities that you serve. The other one with the language of frontline, and this is something that's been once in 100 years event, is for the first time in all of ours and several lifetimes, we have had clinical staff and cleaning staff and portering staff. By the way, do you notice how these unskilled workers suddenly became key workers and key humans? But people were going to work and literally finding themselves, if you use a language of frontline, of being a potential collateral damage, a potential casualty of the so-called war on COVID. And the anxiety that people felt about coming home and causing harm to their loved ones. But the battlefield metaphors are incredibly unhelpful when it comes to the power of language. Because you think about the language that's used, we talk about the war against, insert your condition here, frailty, heart disease, cancer, COVID, the war against, battling disease, fighting infection, aggressive treatments, immune defensive, the brave patients. I really dislike the language of brave patients. My best friend died 5.5 years ago and of cancer. He was never brave. He always was afraid of his cancer. And when we talk about language, when we communicate language, and this is something that's really important to note, our language carries more weight because of being clinical. The language we use is listened to in a different kind of way. And when we communicate that people are being very brave and very stoic, I think what we do unintentionally is we muzzle them. We muzzle them because they don't feel they can say, actually, I'm completely terrified. I can't breathe. I often think that the respiratory physios are the bravest clinicians on the planet because they're the only ones who will lean into a COVID patient and say, now cough. But the fear that people have, and if we don't give them that space and hold the space to expose their fears and their anxiety, by not using language like this, we can communicate a softer way of enabling people to speak up for themselves. And, there's a difference between empathy and sympathy. There's a wonderful brand new book, and those of you who've watched Peaky Blinders, believe it or not, what's his name? Please put his name. Kieran, and somebody will help, I'm sure, with his name. He's the co-author or co-editor of this book of essays on empathy, along with Professor Pat Dolan in Galway. Kieran Murphy, thank you. And Inver is the Irish word for empathy, but empathy comes from a German word, which is along the lines of being with, staying around, and empathy often is simply holding space, being with someone. Whereas he argues that sympathy is inserting yourself into another's distress. I know how you feel. Yes, I lost a parent too. That isn't empathy. And he argues that sympathy is the enemy of empathy. Because what we do is we communicate a sense of, but I'm holding space for you, I'm holding space for us, and actually I'm holding space for me. So when we become mindful of our language, particularly clinically, we realize that we communicate in a way that can make it better, or honestly, even worse. And another thought while I'm in that space is this. The average patient needs an average of just 45 seconds to tell their story. And because I worked in academic general practice for a number of years, we know from the literature the average doctor gives them 7 seconds. And there is a line of sight correlation between a good experience and a patient being interrupted before they feel they have told their story, which takes as little as 45 seconds. So communicating sometimes is that leaning in with intent to say, I'm listening. And some of you, many of you will have seen this slide before, because again, it's how do we communicate so that we don't keep talking about falls prevention, but safer mobility. One is a deficit mindset. The other one is an asset-based framing, reducing length of stay towards giving patients back time. It changes how we work, how we behave, how we think, how we communicate. The days in hospital, and something you could start tomorrow, is how many days has this person been away from home? Instead of history taking, and it kind of echoes an earlier point that I was making about how long people get to talk, is they don't come with a history. They may come with symptoms, but what they have is a story to tell, and part of our job is to help them to translate their story into clinical language, which we translate into clinical language. And again, hospital in the home, virtual ward, there is actually no ward like home. I'm a massive fan, by the way, of virtual wards. So I suppose as I finish this soliloquy with your contributions and thank you, I love this line by Barack Obama, because I think it speaks also not just of talking, but communicating, in that it's important to make sure that we're talking in ways to each other in a way that heals, not in a way that wounds. And I think that readily applies to how we communicate. Our pace, our pitch, our volume, our pauses, our stories, our empathy, all of these communicate who we are, what we're about, and how we come over to others. So on that, thank you for your time. And do please, I'll open up to all the questions or comments and observations that you would have, and love to hear your thoughts. Yes, thank you, Amy. Putting in that hyperlink to Brene Brown's video, and your comments there, Rowan, about performance or taking history, stop patients being able to tell their stories and their journey. Absolutely, because they become reduced to a checklist, a pro forma, and essentially they become a mosaic of detachable symptoms as opposed to a whole human. So thank you for those comments, and thank you, Sarah and Jen. So any comments, or I'll pass the baton back to you, Justine.
Thank you very much, Brian. What an amazing talk, very inspirational. Ritu, are there any questions in the chat?
Oh, I've been following the chat all along. I've been heckling away.
Okay. If there's anyone,
sorry, Ritu, Justine, apologies.
No, it's okay. You can say what you wanted to say.
I was all. Can I just an extra shout out to Rebecca Arthur, Brian? Pause. Thank you. I love your work.
Okay.
Do feel free to put your cameras on as well if you're comfortable to and happy to.
Yeah, put your cameras on. Put your hand up if you want to say something.
Yeah. Helen, that's a great thing you've done, about from a pro forma to a patient's impressions, history of admission, because it tells their story, and I love that, Helen, what you've just done. Thank you, Jen. I'll pause. Thank you again.
Now, I think one thing that resonated very strongly with me, I was watching a webinar. It was the school psychologist from my daughter's school, and she was talking about anxiety. And she said that told us a little story about a big fish, like a shark, and was baring its teeth, and a little fish. When the little fish thought, oh, this fish has a lot of teeth, it's going to eat me up, the direction of travel was away from the big fish. And when the little fish thought, oh, actually, this shark knows a joke that I don't, and it's laughing, let me go and join it. And its direction of travel was towards the big fish. So it is about how, that story that we are telling ourselves, it actually does impact on how our actions then, how we then act on that. So that was really good.
Supposed to be a scary shark is a shark that was having a great old laugh on those teeth were being bared. That's gorgeous. Thank you. And thank you, Julie, as well. I do want to, by the way, give a really huge shout out to Linda Holt, who's my My best friend a little about business partner. She's brilliant on the neuroscience of all of this stuff. So your question, Suzanne, about changing the terms that journalists use now, it has to be said, we rarely hear it now. But do you remember the term bed blocker? That came from healthcare. That was us. And then quite a number of us started saying, actually, this is blaming the patient. They do not want to be in a bed. So let's not make it feel like it's their fault. And now we rarely use that term, and you don't hear it heard in the media nearly as much either. I was interviewed on Radio 5 Live, I think, for something or other about, I think it might be part of the Saudi NVJ paralysis campaign, and they used the phrase, and before I answered the question, I said, well, of course, this is not a term that's used because it's and unintentionally blames the patient. And part of the trick with the journalist is don't make it feel it's their fault, because all they'll do is they'll just keep using it. It's challenge the idea, not the person. Challenge the behavior, not blame the person. So people more willing to engage when they feel it's not an attack on them, it's a challenge of the construct. But thank you. That's a great question, Suzanne.
That's brilliant. Thank you so much, Brian. It's been very, very inspirational. So lots of takeaways there. I think I have taken away the fact that the average, it takes an average of 45 seconds for our patients to tell their stories. And that means a lot. It can affect their experience, the story they will tell about our services. So that's powerful. And we need to lean in with intent. Michael West calls it listening with fascination. I think that's another powerful aspect. And thank you for telling us, for reminding us of those words that we need to avoid using. So thank you everyone for being here. It's been amazing. Thanks to the Agile East Committee and the National Executive Committee. And thank you, Brian, Professor Brian. We are really grateful that you've been with us. So this is the last event for 2022 from Agile East, and we are planning lots of things for you for the next year, for the new year. So please keep in touch with us. Those of you who wish to join Agile, please do get in touch, check our website, follow us on Twitter, and we will continue to learn together and to tell better stories that will be more and more impactful. Thank you, and all the best.
Stay safe, stay positive, test negative. God bless.
Thank you.
Bye for now.
You can stop recording, Justine.